This is the Mining Memories interview with Anne Cave, part 2. We're going to go back a bit to more your time when you're actually with mining communities. Could you describe what your average day would be like?
How far back are we talking? When I was at school?
We can do both.
Okay. Right. Okay, well, going back to school days, obviously we didn't have central heating. And my mum would get up first in the morning. I'm thinking about winter now, I don't know why, but anyhow. She'd get up first in the morning. Our clothes were kept in a sideboard affair in the kitchen. And because she'd light the fire as soon as she got up, she'd drape my sister and my clothes over the fire guard so they were warm when we got up. And we'd get dressed, and you always had breakfast. Usually a bacon sandwich or something, an egg sandwich, porridge if we were a bit skint. And then you'd walk to school, and it was quite a long walk to school. My sister was 3 years younger than me, so when I first started school, she would be in a little pram and be wheeled up. And then, of course, as I said, the roof fell in on the school, so we were all farmed out, and we had to walk miles to school. It was a really long journey. And because my mum had to walk back then, and then walk and fetch us home in the afternoon. School dinners were horrendous, but I was always a greedy kid, so I always had seconds anyway. And we always had a cooked tea when we got home. A lot of the kids didn't. It was bread and jam or whatever because they'd had a cooked dinner at school, but my mum was very insistent that we had good nutrition. And the meals as well were different to what we would eat now because it would be a money saving thing, I guess. You always started with something stodgy to fill you up before you had your meat and veggies. And there was not a lot of vegetables. There was a lot of potatoes, a little bit of meat, and whatever one vegetable was in season. And then there was a pudding after to fill all the gaps up. So the bulk of your meal would be quite cheap ingredients, your stodgy stuff to start. There used to be a roast dinner on a Sunday as usual, and everything would be leftovers on Monday, and then it would be turned into soup on Tuesday, and the soup would get thinner through the week until by Saturday it was, very thin. But that would be your starter. Your soup would be your starter. The first day you had the soup, it was the main meal, and then as it got thinner through the week, you'd have that to start with a lump of bread. Well, in our house, anyhow.
Can you remember some examples? You were talking about stodgy stuff to start with. What sort of thing would you
Suet
have?
puddings. Oh my God, they were delicious. I mean, how bad for you, really, when you think about it, suet. But they really were nice. Sometimes they'd have a bit of savoury gravy with them. Sometimes we'd have a big suet pudding, and it'd have a bit of savoury gravy or just a bit of salt sprinkled on it, and then you'd have a bit more suet pudding afterwards with a bit of treacle on. That was nice. Or a Yorkshire pudding with gravy in, which was my favourite, would be your starter.
And what did you have for sort of puddings?
Puddings would be what we now call nursery puddings. There'd be rice pudding, which quite often would be made with half milk and half water to save a bit of money. But if we were well off, we'd have a rice pudding made with milk, and then it'd have a dab of butter and sugar on the top. Delicious. Spotted dick, roly-polies, all manner of steamed suet puddings. There was always steamed suet pudding. Sometimes with fruit if you'd got some money, or just with a sprinkle of sugar. Sugar sandwiches I never liked, but they were quite common.
You mentioned you get a small amount of meat. What was the most common meat that you'd be getting?
Well, for us, as I mentioned earlier, my dad was a motor mechanic, and he fixed mainly lorries when I was a kid because there weren't that many cars. And one of the guys that he fixed lorries for was a pig farmer. So for us, we did have quite a lot of pork. Until I was 20, or in my 20s, I always thought my mum wasn't keen on meat. I should have clicked on before, but you just, wrapped up in your own life, you never think about it. Because when we were little, she'd always have a tiny slice of meat, and my sister and myself and my dad would have the lion's share, if you like. And she'd say, no, I'm not bothered about meat. But she was just... I'm off again.
Take a minute.
She was just always my mum to me. You think, everybody's mums were the same, but they were so good, those women. They were so strong. And it didn't matter whether they'd got no money or a little money, they made do. Sometimes they'd got nothing. And she made all our clothes. Everybody's mum did, it wasn't just my mum, but we just took her for granted. Oh dear. This is ridiculous. I think you go through life not thinking about these things, don't you? Weird. But she never had anything for herself. She had this dreadful green coat. I think she'd had it when she was married. And every winter it came out. It was a horrendous coat. It was just a shapeless bag. And she'd try and jazz it up with a few new buttons. One year she got a bit of fake fur and put a collar on it and things like that. Never looked any good. Poor old Ma. But as I say, everybody's mums were the same. The only exception that I can remember as a child, we had this really exotic creature moving to Marrow Road. Vera, her name was. No better than she should have been, I can tell you. And I guess she must have been a bit of a dodgy character because she'd always got plenty of money and she dressed really well. She's very glamorous and I aspired to be Vera. I really did. She was very exotic. She worked in the lace market. She was a factory girl. But she was out every night and she'd always got lots of money, so we'll draw a line under that.
Can you remember what she looked like?
Yeah, I can, yeah. She'd got bleach blonde hair, which was, that's just way out for that time of the day. And everybody was vaguely disapproving of her. Well, all the ladies, I think all the men were a little bit, blimey, have you seen the new lass up the road, sort of thing. She didn't wear a pinny. She certainly didn't wear a headscarf. She wore high heels all the time. And she was cheerful, always had a smile for us kids. And she used to fascinate me. I used to spend quite a lot of time around at V's. Until one particular time, how old would I be? Be about 5 or 6, because it was shortly before we moved from there. I was just on my way out to see Vera. So I'd come from school and had dinner, and I thought I'll just pop up and see Vera, because I felt very grown up going to see Vera. Just about to pop out of our gateway when there was an almighty shriek, and Vera's voice went, "And don't come back, you little bleeder." This kid came flying down the hill, It was one of the big lads, so he would have been about 12, something like that. Absolutely roping at the top of his voice. And as he went past our gate, he stopped. The roping stopped, just cut off while he felt at the back of his neck, looked at his hand, realised he wasn't bleeding to death, and then carried on roping all the way down the street. He lived on Primrose Street at the bottom of the hill. 90 miles an hour down the hill, screaming his head off. It transpired. I went back inside. I thought, I'm not, that frightened me a little bit. I was a bit of a wimpy kid. And having glanced up the street, V was standing there in a pink housecoat with a milk bottle in her hand. It transpired that this kid had been trying to ogle V. We hadn't got bathrooms, and she was having a wash at the sink. Looked up. This kid was looking through a kitchen window. So she'd grabbed the first thing to hand, which was a milk bottle, and welted him across the back of the head. Nothing happened. There was one or two tuts of like, well, she shouldn't have used a milk bottle. Nobody said she shouldn't have welted him. Everybody was quite accepting that he deserved it. I'm quite sure he didn't go home and tell his parents because they would have given him another good hiding. And nothing happened. Nobody said anything to Vera because everybody accepted that he should have had a clip round the ear. But a milk bottle perhaps was a little bit too much. So she was a shining beacon, but that disillusioned me a little bit. I thought, blimey, she's prone to hitting people with milk bottles. I'm not going back again. So that sort of drew a line under Vera. And then there was another lady, nothing like Vera at all. And I met her again when I was 15 or 16, quite grown up then, because I'd left school and was working then. Oh, what the devil was her name? It wasn't Mavis. Mildred, that's it. And it was a M. She was a normal sort of pitwife type lady with the pinny and the headscarf, but she liked to go out and drink port and lemon. And when she did, she had thick red lipstick on, and her hair had been done up in her curlers. Sometimes she took them out before she went out, but most nights she didn't. Anyhow, she was tutted about a little bit, and I never quite knew why. It was just one of those things. There was nothing outstanding about her other than the fact that she drank port and lemon. There was nothing outstanding about her that made me aware of why she was tutted about, but the ladies would talk about her and shut up whenever the kids came near. Anyway, as I say, I met her again in a pub in Nottingham, actually. I'd gone with some friends, and I think it was probably my first or second visit to a pub, and I felt very grown up. I would only have been about 15. Anyhow, Mildred was in there with her port and lemon, very drunk, and regaling everybody with her life history. And it turned out the reason I'm presuming she was tutted about was because she used to charge her husband for sex. And that's how she got her port and lemon money. If it was a bad week, she'd go out and find somebody else to fund the port and lemon. But that's why she was tutted about. And the husband was he was a tiny little ferret of a man. Perhaps she deserved the money, I don't know. But she was a character.
Can you describe what an average day would be like in the second mining community that you moved to?
Yes, I kept goats, sheep, chickens, etc. And as I've said, to get across the road, to get to the field, you had to cross the road. So my first job every day was to do the milking, because I used to sell the milk and make cheese and sell the cheese, or we'd swap and chop. So the milking had to be done first, and then the girls had to go across the road to the grazing. And nearly everybody had a dog. So you'd meet an awful lot of people walking dogs, mostly retired miners, but sometimes it would be miners' wives, or sometimes a miner between shifts would be walking his dog. So it could take quite a lot of time to turn the goats out, because you see so many people and everybody had got a few words to say, and there was always a chat. And then after that, I would come back. Sorry, that's my phone. Just up the yard in one of the cottages was an old lady. Her husband had been a miner, but he'd been dead many years. He'd had a dreadful accident, lost part of his arm and one of his legs. It was horrendous. He was alive when we moved in, but died shortly after. And so she couldn't get out. She'd got 2 sons, but they didn't live locally. So the second job of the day was to go up and see what she wanted, because she was old school and you shopped every day. And even though she couldn't get out, she still wanted her shopping doing every day. So you'd go up and see what she wanted. You'd come away with a little list, and whatever she fancied going on at Bookies. We had a Bookies up the village, which was in somebody's front room, I seem to remember. So you'd go up and put her bet on, do a bit of shopping, come back, and then your working day would start. Come home, have something to eat, milk the goats again, have your proper meal, and then sometimes I went out and we'd just go round to the forest tavern for a drink and a bit of a social. Usually I came home before everybody decamped to the working men's club. My husband went out nearly every night, but most of the blokes did. Didn't drink a lot. They'd have maybe a pint in the Havelock, a pint in the Forest Tavern, and then off in the working men's club to finish off. But there'd be a lot of banter. Usually a game of dominoes. The dominoes was quite serious, actually. One of the mainstays of the dominoes team was actually a chap who'd got emphysema, and he had towards the latter part of his life, and indeed our life in that area, he had an oxygen machine, and if he started to gasp in the night, they had to get him back quick to strap him up to the oxygen machine. Quite a lot of the older ones had various, I suppose, dust-related diseases, and they'd had accidents down the pit. But it was just part of life. Nobody was miserable or blaming people or bitter. In the main, they weren't. Some were. And there was one old chap. When we moved into the village, he was nearly crippled, but he always managed to get down to his allotment every day and do a little bit down there. And his wife looked after him. And then, bless her, she had a stroke. Their son didn't go down the pit. He worked at Kodak. Everybody thought he would die. He was a real swinging gait, you know. He just hung on to life. Nobody would have been surprised if he'd have ended up in a wheelchair or died or whatever. But it was actually his wife who ended up in a wheelchair. And again, there was usually somebody that would make a meal or pop to the shops. The son who worked at Kodak eventually ended up giving up his job and looking after them. And my mum was fetch Mrs. Marriott again to bath her when she first came home, because obviously it's difficult to adjust to being crippled, really. She was down one side. And so Mum helped and showed them how to help her. But it was all the support was given as a norm. Nobody would have thought, oh, I've done a really good deed for so-and-so. I expect praise. You just did it. Like with the shopping for the old lady, you just knock on the door and shout, "It's only me," and she'd have a list ready. You never thought. And the young miner that I told you about earlier with the art student that moved into the cottage next door to us, when we left, he used to do her shopping. It was seamless. I never said to him, "Oh, David, can you, he just did it." And the people that lived at the back of her made her a bowl of soup every day. And it's not that long ago. That's the thing that always strikes me. I'm only 58, honestly. It sounds like something out of a Dickens story, but it isn't.
Did you find that was a similar case when you moved to the farm and the other slightly different mining community, well, farming, I suppose?
The farm was different because it isolates you. You haven't got near neighbours, so you don't get the chance to integrate as quickly, or not integrate. Some people just move to places and have no intention of. There were quite a few like that in Annesley. People had moved in and just didn't. They lived there, and you'd say good morning, but with the farm it was very different. I've always worked with horses, and so when we went to the farm, that's what I did. I was breaking and schooling, which isn't something that was a benefit to the community. However, having said that, a lot of the old mining types grew up with horses in that area because it's quite a rural area. So their parents had working horses. They'd worked with horses on the farms as boys before they went down the pit. Obviously there were pit ponies. And I think as well, women with horses, not now because mostly horses are handled by women, but years ago women didn't handle horses. So you put yourself up for judgment for that. But I am quite good at my job. So after about, 18 months, people started to notice that unbroken horses were coming in and broken horses were going out, and nobody was getting killed. I was quite good at it. So I was accepted on that level and on that basis. But I found they would, even as they were accepting you and talking to you about horses and their experiences with horses, and in a roundabout way asking what you'd do if X, Y, Z, they would be deliberately as coarse as they possibly could, just to try and see if you could cope with it, if they could get a reaction. They didn't, so they stopped. But they were quite aggressive. And also, as we've said, our miners worked and they didn't. So there were a lot of snardy references to that for the first couple of years. And one of the old guys, I think we must have lived there 4 years before he even spoke to us. Not quite as bad as the bloke who lived across the lane, because he was a copper, and he certainly never got spoken to.
Did you find that you missed the closeness of the community life previously?
No, it was just a different life, a different chapter, and I was busy, really busy. There was just a constant flow of horses coming in. Plus, I'd also had a baby at this point. So they're quite time consuming. But the community, again, some of the houses on the settlements had been sold. They were originally full of miners that were busy trying to make a living doing something that they hadn't got a clue what they were doing. It was very difficult for them. Some were successful, and indeed there's a couple, 3 I think, down there now, who are still doing it. But it's difficult to make a living from a small amount of land anyway. You're out there cutting cauliflowers and what have you in all weathers. It's hard work. The central farm took a big cut of the profits, so it was never going to be easy for anybody. So a lot of them did sell up eventually, and then you've got incomers, and a lot of the incomers really just have no intention of. There's a headmaster and his wife live down there. There's a bloke that had, he's died now, but he had a garage in Clown, petrol station in Clown, and his wife. They moved down there. A builder. A chap who sells farm machinery. So they're all incomers. There are quite a few more, but where I'm going with this is they form their own little clique. They don't, they don't sort of all mix together. Very separate little orbits.
Seems like a good place to stop. I'm going to have to go. So I don't know if you want to just pause it there. I don't know if you want to carry on or whether